What if I told you that the most violent, horrific nightmare you've ever had isn't actually proof that you have this, like, dark or twisted mind, but is actually mathematical proof of your deep inherent empathy?
It sounds completely contradictory, I know.
Right. But think about that for a second. Because, well, we've all been there. It's maybe 3 or 4 in the morning. You wake up with this sudden gasp, and your chest is just absolutely pounding against your
You're
ribs.
completely drenched in sweat.
Yes, a cold sweat. And you're staring up at the dark ceiling, completely unable to move for a few seconds.
Mhm.
Your mind is just reeling from a nightmare that felt so undeniably, terrifyingly real.
Yeah, the visceral panic.
Exactly. And as the shadows in the room slowly come into focus, you try to remind yourself, it wasn't real. You were safe. It was just a dream.
But it doesn't really work, does it?
No, not at all. That emotional hangover, that heavy, sinking feeling in your gut, it doesn't just fade away when you open your eyes. It shadows your whole morning, and you're left wondering, like, if there's something fundamentally wrong with you.
Right, and that lingering feeling, it's actually a biological reality. I mean, while the narrative of the dream was entirely fictional, the physiological and emotional responses your body just went through were 100% real.
Because your brain doesn't know the difference.
Exactly. During REM sleep, the amygdala, which is the brain's threat detection center, is highly active, while the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for logic and reality testing, is essentially powered down.
Wow. So the logic center is just offline.
Totally offline. Your brain literally lacks the hardware in that moment to know the difference between a perceived threat in a dream and an actual physical threat standing in your bedroom.
That is wild.
Yeah, so the adrenaline, the cortisol, the panic, all of that is actually pumping through your veins.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Mhm.
Because that visceral, shaking reality is exactly what we're getting into today.
It's a heavy one today.
It really is. We are looking at a fascinating psychological breakdown of a very specific, intense dream. In this dream, the dreamer experiences something horrific. They witness their beloved dog having its life taken away.
Just a brutal image.
Awful. And then in a blind, absolute rage, the dreamer retaliates by taking a life in return.
Right.
And the rest of the dream, which stretches on for what feels like 20 entire years, is just them on the run. They are entirely haunted by guilt, pursued by the authorities, and just wrestling with this profound sense of regret.
It is an incredibly heavy, dense narrative. And, the breakdown we're looking at today treats this not just as a scary story, but as a complex psychological puzzle.
Right, because there's so much going on there.
Exactly. We are dealing with anger, profound regret, a twisted sense of justice, and this absolute crushing guilt.
So our mission for this deep dive is to figure out exactly why our minds put us through these terrifying scenarios.
Yes.
We want to discover how our subconscious uses these extreme, jarring narratives to reveal the hidden anxieties, the suppressed emotions, and the unseen burdens that we carry around in our waking lives.
Right, because these dreams aren't signs that you're a bad person.
Yeah, but I want to play devil's advocate right out of the gate here.
Sure, go for it.
When you wake up from a dream where you do something that terrible, taking a life in return, it is incredibly hard not to feel like you just got a glimpse into a dark, evil part of your soul.
Oh, absolutely. That's the first place our minds go.
Right. So how can we possibly say this isn't a sign of some sort of moral failing?
Well, it's a natural fear, but it's fundamentally misinterpreting how the subconscious communicates.
How so?
So the subconscious is a highly dramatic storyteller because the logical, language-based parts of your brain are offline during sleep. It can't just, hand you a memo that says, hey, you're really stressed about your boundaries at work.
That'd be much easier, though.
It would be. But it can't do that. It has to speak in the language of visual and emotional shock value. Ah, I see.
It uses extreme metaphors because often that is literally the only way it can get our waking, logical minds to actually pay attention to a problem we are aggressively ignoring.
So we're talking about like a translation issue between the sleeping brain and the waking brain.
Precisely.
Let's look at how that translation starts then. The psychological breakdown identifies the beginning of this dream as the inciting incident, and it's brutal.
Very tough to read.
The dreamer looks down and sees their beloved dog. The dog is bleeding, crying out, and the dreamer can see the dog's life slipping away.
Right.
And the most agonizing part is that the dreamer is completely paralyzed. They are just standing there watching this innocent creature having its life taken away, and they physically cannot move to help it.
That paralysis is key.
Ah,
But before we get into the inability to move, we have to look at the neurology of this symbol itself.
you mean the dog?
Yeah, why a dog? When a dog's life is threatened in a dream, it very rarely represents a literal fear for your actual pet. Oh, really? I always thought it meant I was worried about my golden retriever.
No, you aren't having a premonition or anything. In Jungian psychology and modern dream analysis, symbols are formed by emotional association. A dog represents an entity that offers unconditional acceptance.
Unconditional acceptance. Okay, let me see if I'm tracking this. We project our waking emotional needs onto this avatar of a dog because, well, a dog doesn't care if you messed up a presentation at work, right?
All right, exactly.
Or if you said something super awkward at a dinner party, they just look at you with total love.
Yeah.
They were essentially a safe space personified.
Precisely. They represent pure, uncritical loyalty.
Okay, that makes sense.
So when your subconscious creates a scenario where that specific symbol is bleeding and having its life taken away, it is symbolizing a deep, profound anxiety in your waking life.
So it's about a threat to that safety.
Exactly. It means that you feel something incredibly precious to your core identity is under active threat. It could be your actual safe space, a foundational relationship, your sense of belonging, or even, your own internal peace of mind.
Right.
Something that provides you with unconditional comfort is being attacked, and you feel entirely vulnerable to that loss.
Wait, I have to challenge that, though.
Okay, what's your thought?
If this is really just about daily anxiety, like, say, I'm worried about my job security or my partner and I have been arguing, why does the subconscious have to make the imagery so incredibly gruesome?
It does seem extreme.
Right. Like, why does it have to go to the extreme of a dog's life being taken away? Why not just have me dream about being late for work or failing a math test? That seems unnecessarily traumatic.
It does seem cruel, but this happens because of our incredible human capacity for cognitive denial.
Okay, cognitive denial.
Yeah, think about the concept of emotional consolidation. During waking hours, we are constantly filtering out stress just to remain functional. We brush off feelings of being overwhelmed, we compartmentalize.
Oh, I definitely do that. Just put it in a box and deal with it later.
We all do, but the subconscious doesn't compartmentalize. It absorbs the cumulative toll this stress is taking on your nervous system.
So it's keeping score.
Exactly. When you ignore the subtle signs, the subconscious realizes that, polite whispers aren't breaking through your waking defenses. So it initiates an amygdala hijack during sleep.
An amygdala hijack. That sounds intense.
It is. It transforms your ignored everyday worries into these intense, unforgettable visuals because it is actively trying to force a physiological reaction. It wants you to wake up sweating so you literally cannot brush it off anymore.
Okay, so it's less like a polite notification on your phone and more like, well, let's look at it like a background app on a computer or a phone.
That's a good analogy.
Right. If you have a massive program running in the background, say unprocessed anxiety, you might not be looking at it on your screen, but it is silently draining your battery, overheating your CPU, and just slowing down your entire operating system.
Yep, and you don't even realize it's happening.
So the gruesome dream is your operating system finally crashing completely, just to force you to acknowledge that catastrophic drain on your battery.
That is a much more accurate way to look at it, actually. The system crash is a protective measure.
A protective measure.
Yeah.
Even though it feels awful.
Yes. The subconscious is saying, I will horrify you if I have to, as long as it gets you to look at the damage you are taking in your waking life.
Wow. Okay, that shifts my perspective a lot.
And that brings us to the next massive element of this inciting incident in the dream, which is the paralysis.
Right, the inability to move.
The dreamer is watching the dog, watching the symbol of unconditional love bleed, and they cannot move, they cannot save it.
Yeah, the breakdown heavily highlights this specific feeling. The inability to act is a recurring massive theme that stretches over the entire dream.
It really is the anchor of the dream's emotional weight.
The dreamer remembers looking down and feeling that distinct, agonizing sensation of not being able to go to the rescue, that feeling of being frozen. And that introduces this first major emotional weight that the dreamer has to carry, which is guilt.
If we connect this inability to act back to the waking world, it maps perfectly onto our nervous system's response to an overwhelming threat.
Like the fight or flight response.
Yes, but we always talk about fight or flight, and we often ignore the third evolutionary response, which is freeze.
Oh, right. Fight, flight, or freeze.
Exactly. Polyvagal theory explains that when a threat is perceived as totally insurmountable, the nervous system completely shuts down to brace for impact.
It just pulls the plug.
Basically, yeah. In real life, many people experience moments where they desperately want to help someone, or fix a broken situation, or speak up against an injustice, but they find themselves completely frozen. They're literally unable to intervene.
And that freeze response creates this lingering, heavy regret that just sinks all the way to the bottom of the mind.
It haunts people.
It's that feeling of walking away from a situation and thinking, why didn't I say something? Why didn't I do something? You replay it in the shower for weeks.
Yes, and the mind holds on to it. But the analysis we are looking at offers a really profound reframing of this specific type of guilt.
How so?
Well, we tend to view guilt as a toxic, negative emotion. We think it means we are fundamentally flawed or, cowardly. But blaming yourself for not being able to protect something is actually the biological flip side of empathy.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the analysis is basically saying that the fact that you feel so terrible is the very proof of your kindness.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, a truly cold, callous person wouldn't feel guilt over an inability to protect something. They wouldn't have this agonizing dream in the first place because they simply wouldn't care.
What's fascinating here is the neurological contrast. A sociopath, someone lacking the neural pathways for deep empathy, does not have nightmares about failing to save a bleeding dog.
They just don't have them.
They don't.
Right.
The presence of the guilt is the undeniable evidence of a deep, inherent compassion. If you did not care deeply, the failure to act would not register as trauma to your subconscious.
That is so powerful.
The pain of the dream is a direct measurement of the size of your heart.
I've always thought of guilt as just useless self-pity. But you're saying guilt is like a shadow.
A shadow, yeah.
A shadow can only exist because there is a powerful source of light shining nearby. Your inherent kindness, your empathy, your desire to protect, that is the light.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
And when you are blocked from acting on that kindness, it casts this long, dark shadow of guilt. If you were just living in total darkness with no light of empathy whatsoever, there would be no shadow at all. You just wouldn't feel it.
Exactly. The shadow only proves the light is there. And understanding that is a crucial step in unpacking this dream.
It changes the whole context of the nightmare.
It does. The subconscious is forcing you to look at your own shadow so that you can acknowledge the light casting it. But this brings us to a major pivot in the dream.
Right, because it doesn't just end with the guilt.
No, it doesn't. Kindness and guilt are not the only emotions at play here. Because when something we deeply love is threatened or harmed, the immediate explosive reaction is rarely just sadness.
It's rage.
It is often pure, blinding rage.
Which brings us to the climax of the dream. The retaliation.
The breaking point.
Yes. The dreamer's looking at the dog, and suddenly they realize who caused this. The dreamer realizes a friend was the one who dropped the dog.
A trusted friend, which makes it worse.
Right. And in that split second, the paralysis breaks. But it is replaced by a complete loss of control. The dreamer goes into a blind rage. They lose all sense of self, all sense of consequence, and they retaliate by taking the friend's life in return.
It's a shocking escalation.
It really is. Now, what really caught my attention in the breakdown is that even immediately after the act, even after being caught and realizing the absolute horror of what just happened, a part of the dreamer's mind keeps insisting that was the right thing to do.
Yes. That internal insistence, that quiet, stubborn voice saying, I was right, is one of the most complex psychological phenomena we can experience.
Why do we do that?
To understand it, we first have to break down our societal misconception of anger.
Okay.
We are often taught that anger is a moral failing, that it represents a loss of control, a weakness, something to be ashamed of and suppressed.
Yeah, you're always told to calm down or don't be so angry.
Exactly. But from a psychological and evolutionary standpoint, anger is not a weakness at all. It is a biological protective response designed to activate when our boundaries are crossed or when something precious to us is harmed.
I understand anger is a biological response, sure, but I'm not sure I buy that completely in this context.
What part aren't you buying?
Well, society constantly tells us that blind rage is toxic. How can we view a dream where someone completely loses control and takes a life in return as a justified biological response? That sounds like a major cop-out for bad behavior.
I get why you'd say that, but it's vital to separate the waking life action from the dream state symbolism.
Okay, separate them how?
We are not justifying violence in real life. What we are analyzing is the source of the disproportionate emotional surge in the dream. Why is the anger in the dream so violently explosive?
Right. Why take a life in return instead of just yelling at the friend?
It's because of what we do with our anger in waking life. When people constantly suppress their daily small frustrations, when they swallow their anger at a disrespectful boss, when they bite their tongue with a passive-aggressive family member,
Oh man, I do that all the time.
when they constantly prioritize keeping the peace over enforcing their own boundaries, that anger doesn't just evaporate.
It accumulates.
Yes, exactly. It builds up silently in the nervous system. The explosive rage in the dream, the act of taking a life in return for the dog isn't actually about the specific friend in the dream or even the dog.
It's about everything else.
Yes, it's a massive psychological backlash from enduring and bottling up all those micro frustrations for months or years in reality. The subconscious is finally letting off the pressure valve.
Wow.
It takes all the unexpressed anger from 100 different waking scenarios and focuses it into one blinding, catastrophic moment of retaliation.
Okay, that makes sense. It's the dam breaking. But that brings us back to that really bizarre duality in the aftermath.
The feeling of being justified.
Yeah. The dreamer has committed this ultimate taboo. They feel immense, crushing regret. Yet, simultaneously, they are clutching onto this sense of righteousness. How is it possible to feel both at the exact same time?
This is a classic example of cognitive dissonance managed by the brain's defense mechanisms.
Cognitive dissonance, right?
If the dreamer were to suddenly absorb the full, unmitigated weight of what they had just done, taking a life in return, their psyche might literally collapse under the trauma of that guilt.
It's too much data for the brain to process.
Exactly. The ego would shatter. So the brain compartmentalizes. It creates a split screen in your consciousness.
It sounds like holding two magnets with the same poles together. You have this fierce sense of justice, like I was protecting what I loved, pushing right up against the profound regret of crossing a line.
That's a great visual.
Or like having a defense attorney and a prosecutor existing in the exact same brain. The prosecutor is screaming, "Look at what you did. This is unforgivable." And the defense attorney is jumping up and shouting, "Objection! We were protecting what we loved. We were defending the innocent."
Yes.
And they're just battling it out, trying to protect the core identity of the dreamer from totally collapsing.
That is a perfect analogy. The defense attorney, that sense of justice, is a literal shield to protect the ego from the profound, terrifying regret of crossing an unforgivable line.
That's so interesting.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is exactly why people get so entrenched in arguments in real life.
Wait, really? Is this why people get so entrenched in arguments in real life? Because they're trying to use justice as a shield against their own inner guilt?
Yes. When someone refuses to apologize, even when they are clearly wrong, they are often using their sense of justice or righteousness as a shield to protect themselves from feeling their own inner guilt about how they behaved.
That explains so much about internet arguments, honestly.
It really does. The brain is literally trying to protect you from the reality of your own actions by convincing you of your own heroism. Having contradictory feelings isn't a contradiction, it's proof of a multifaceted perspective.
That is genuinely wild. We are highly capable of viewing our own actions from multiple angles at the exact same time. But here's the psychological paradox.
Okay.
The moment you act on that explosive, justified rage, the brain's defense mechanism shatters. The conscious mind suddenly realizes what it just did, and because it can't process that massive data load of guilt, it triggers the most primal biological response we have.
Flight.
Flight. It forces the dreamer to run, which launches us into the next major sequence of the dream, the escape.
Yes. Amidst the chaos of what just happened with the friend's life taken away, the dreamer turns and flees.
They just bolt.
They do. And they aren't just running away from the scene of the incident, they are desperately trying to distance themselves from the new reality they have just created.
The analysis points out that the dreamer is terrified of being caught, sure, but there is something much deeper happening. They are fleeing the reality of their own actions. They just want to rewind the clock, but since they can't, they run blindly into the dark.
The psychology of escaping is deeply rooted in our evolutionary hardware. We've just analyzed the fight, that explosive retaliation. Now we're seeing the flight.
Right.
Running away in the aftermath of a massive mistake is very rarely a sign of calculated malicious evasion. And despite how we usually judge it, it's not necessarily a sign of moral weakness.
Really? Because we definitely judge people who run away from their problem.
We do, but biologically, it is a primal, instinctual reaction to protect the conscious mind when the weight of responsibility is simply too massive to process all at once. the mind goes blank.
It goes back to that data load concept. The brain literally cannot compute the data. The file is too large to open, so the system just crashes and reboots into survival mode.
Precisely. The immediate reality is so painful, so incompatible with the dreamer's view of themselves as a good person, that the brain mandates physical distance.
Physical distance from the act.
Yes. Distance from the event is fundamentally required before the individual can even begin to comprehend the accountability they must eventually face. If they stayed in that room, standing over the consequence of their actions, the emotional overload would be neurologically catastrophic.
You know, mapping this onto our waking lives, it removes a lot of the shame we carry. We all have that urge to flee when we mess up.
We really do.
It might not be fleeing a literal crime scene, but think about ghosting. You send a text message you immediately regret, and what do? You throw your phone across the room.
Absolutely, you just want it away from you.
You literally physically distance yourself from the device. Or you make a huge embarrassing mistake at work and you suddenly feel the urge to take a sick day. Or you actively walk down different hallways just to avoid running into your boss.
We ghost difficult conversations. We avoid opening our bank apps when we know we've overspent. We skip social events if we know there will be conflict. We are always running from the immediate pain of consequence.
It's just human nature.
It is, and the analysis makes a really compassionate point here. Instead of endlessly shaming ourselves for winning away, perhaps we need to acknowledge that in that specific moment, our overloaded brains felt it was the only option.
Because the shame just adds another layer of weight. Instead of saying, I'm a coward for running, we should acknowledge that in that specific moment of crisis, our overloaded, panicked brains felt that fleeing was biologically the only available option to survive the emotional spike.
Acknowledging that allows you to stop punishing yourself for the biological reality of panic.
That's a relief.
However, while understanding the flight instinct is important, the dream also delivers a harsh truth about the limitations of escaping.
You can't run forever.
No, running provides only temporary superficial relief. It buys you time, but it doesn't change the facts. As the dream shows, no matter how far you run, no matter how fast you go, you absolutely cannot outrun your own mind.
Which brings us to arguably the most exhausting and terrifying part of this entire dream sequence, the time jump.
This part is so fascinating.
The dream suddenly skips forward, and it has been 20 long years, 2 decades, and the dreamer, they are still on the run.
Still running.
They are older, time has passed, but the anxiety is just as fresh as day one. The police are still actively pursuing them. Their faces still remember. There were still wanted posters everywhere. And the guilt, that crushing weight from 20 years ago, has not faded even one single bit.
This specific element, the 20-year timeline, is crucial for unpacking the deep subconscious message here. We have this very common, almost cliché waking life proverb, time heals all wounds.
Everyone says that.
We rely on it. We assume that if we just put enough calendar pages between ourselves and our mistakes or our traumas, the pain will naturally dissolve. But the subconscious is here to tell the dreamer that this is a complete myth. Time does not automatically heal pain.
Let me play devil's advocate here, though. Isn't it true that people naturally get over things as time passes? Memories fade, right? Why is the dream insisting that 20 years changes nothing?
Because of the psychological mechanics of rumination, time only heals if the time is used for processing.
So just waiting isn't enough.
Exactly. If old wounds or past mistakes or deep regrets aren't properly faced and metabolized by the brain, they don't just fade away. They get trapped in the default mode network of your brain.
The default mode network.
Yes, which is the network active when your mind is wandering. They set up permanent residence in the back of the mind. The 20-year pursuit in the dream is the brain's way of saying, you never processed this. You just ran. And because you never dealt with it, it is still here, constantly running in the background, dictating your nervous system's baseline.
So it's back to that heavy background app on your phone. You haven't looked at the app in 20 years, but you never actually closed it, so your battery is still draining every single day.
Exactly.
But let's look at who is actually doing the chasing here. Because the imagery is very specific. It's the police, the authorities.
This raises an important question about the psychological identity of those police officers.
What's fascinating here is when we dream of being chased by the law, our immediate assumption is that we are afraid of external judgment, right? We think we are afraid of society finding out what we did or our friends judging us.
Right, that's the surface level reading.
But the breakdown provides a much deeper analysis. The police chasing the dreamer are not external authorities. They don't represent the government or society at all. They represent the dreamer's own strict, internalized judge.
Wait, so the dreamer is literally chasing themselves?
Yes, the call is coming from inside the house. People who are highly empathetic and consequently often overly harsh and critical of themselves create these endless, looping inner pursuit sequences. The part of you that demands perfection, the part of you that refuses to forgive your own mistakes, puts on a police uniform in your dream and relentlessly hunts you down.
That makes so much sense.
The reason the dreamer cannot escape for 20 years isn't because the police are so good at their jobs. It's because you cannot hide from yourself. Your inner judge knows exactly where you are at all times.
That is so incredibly exhausting. You are the fugitive and the warden all at once. You are spending all this mental energy running and all this mental energy chasing, all inside your own head.
It's a closed loop of anxiety.
And we see the ultimate consequence of this endless chase in the final sitting of the dream. The dreamer is at an airport.
Right, the airport scene.
The airport is a very potent symbol. Airports are places of transit, connection, and movement. People are going places, living their lives, connecting with loved ones.
Right. But in the dream, the dreamer finds themselves physically unable to walk the same path as everyone else. The normal people are walking on the concourse, going to their gates, but the dreamer keeps slipping, falling away into this different, isolated lower area.
They're separated from normal life.
Exactly. They can see the normal world, but they cannot participate in it. And ultimately, they are cornered down there. They're surrounded by this massive crowd of people, and the crowd is just shining these harsh, blinding smartphone flashlights right into their face as they are finally taken away by the authorities.
Let's break down the isolation at the airport first. Running away and hiding might keep you safe from the immediate logistical consequences of your actions, but it creates a massive, continuously widening gap between you and the rest of society.
It cuts you off.
When you are carrying a profound, unprocessed guilt, you start to feel alienated from the human experience.
It's like imposter syndrome on a massive scale. You look around at people buying coffee or laughing with their kids, and you think, if you knew who I really was or what I was hiding, you wouldn't even let me stand next to you.
Exactly. The true tragedy of the dream isn't actually the fear of capture. The capture is almost a relief at that point.
Just to have it be over.
Yes. The true tragedy is the agonizing isolation of the 20-year run. It is the profound loneliness of carrying a secret, feeling fundamentally unworthy of walking the same path as normal people. The dreamer is falling away from the concourse because their guilt has convinced them they don't deserve to exist in the light.
And speaking of the light, the imagery of the crowd with the smartphone flashlights. When I first read that, my immediate reaction was, oh, that is the ultimate modern fear of public cancellation.
Oh, for sure.
It feels so intrusive. You're surrounded by this digital mob, everyone documenting your downfall, shining these tiny blinding spotlights on your worst moment.
It definitely invokes that modern anxiety. But if we follow the psychological logic that the police represent the internal judge, then the crowd and the flashlights also represent internal mechanisms.
Okay, how so?
It's what psychologists call the spotlight effect, but turned inward.
So the harshest spotlight isn't the one on the smartphone. It's the one we shine on ourselves. We put our own flaws under a microscope. We illuminate our own mistakes with this blinding, unforgiving intensity, making them seem larger and more horrific than they actually are.
We are our own worst critics.
We are the crowd. We're the flashlights. We're the ones documenting our own perceived monstrosity.
Which brings us to the ultimate crossroads of this deep dive. If running only leads to this profound, agonizing isolation, and if time alone doesn't actually heal the wound, and if we are the ones aggressively hunting ourselves down with flashlights, how do we stop the pursuit?
Yeah, how do we get out of this?
How do we break the cycle and finally wake up from this emotional nightmare?
That is the million-dollar question. Because living on the run, even just internally, is entirely unsustainable.
It will burn you out.
Thankfully, the analysis doesn't just leave us stranded in the airport with the flashlights in our eyes. It offers a very clear path forward. It says that to stop the chase, we have to learn to accept contradictory emotions without immediately labeling them as strictly good or bad.
That's a huge step.
And, most importantly, we must learn to forgive our past selves.
The concept of emotional neutrality is where the neurological healing begins. We have a deeply ingrained habit of labeling our feelings with moral judgments.
Like, I shouldn't feel this way.
Yes. We tell ourselves, feeling angry makes me a bad person, or regretting this decision means I am fundamentally weak. We attach a moral grade to a biological feeling. But emotions, as we discussed with anger and guilt, are natural defense mechanisms.
They're just information.
They are data. They are not moral verdicts.
It's like looking at the weather. You don't say the rain is evil or the wind is morally corrupt. It's just weather. It's happening. You might need an umbrella, but the rain isn't out to get you.
That's a great way to look at it. The listener is encouraged to practice observing their feelings rather than identifying with them.
Observing, not identifying.
Okay. Imagine your mind is a river, and your emotions, the anger, the guilt, the desire for justice, the urge to run, are just leaves floating down that river. You can stand on the bank and watch a red leaf of anger float by. You acknowledge it. There goes anger.
Right.
But you don't have to jump into the freezing river and let the current drag you away. You observe without letting the emotion control your core identity.
But I'm going to push back here, because observing is one thing, but stopping the inner police chase feels like it requires something much more active.
It does.
The analysis says we have to forgive our past self. And I'll be honest, that sounds a bit like a Hallmark greeting card.
It does sound a little cliche.
How does the listener actually do this? You can't just flip a mental switch and say, I forgive myself for taking a life in return in my dream, or I forgive myself for hurting my friend 10 years ago in real life.
Yeah, you're entirely right to be skeptical of the word forgiveness here, because society has warped its definition. Forgiving your past self does not mean affirming or validating the bad action itself.
Right, doesn't mean you're letting yourself off the hook.
Exactly. It doesn't mean saying taking that life in return was a good thing to do, or lying to my partner was actually fine. That is not forgiveness. That is delusion.
So what is it?
True self-forgiveness is a neurological tool used to break stress response loops. It means understanding why that past version of yourself acted that way in that specific moment.
It's about looking at the context, not just the action.
Yes. It requires you to look at your past self with the same radical empathy you would offer a struggling friend. It means recognizing the deep desire to protect, the overwhelming sadness, the sheer panic, or the accumulated suppressed frustration that drove the mistake.
You have to see the pain behind it.
It means saying, I do not agree with what you did, but I understand how much pain you were in when you did it. When you understand the pain behind the action, the inner judge loses its power. The courtroom is dismissed.
Okay, so practically speaking, how do we facilitate this? Because again, just thinking about it can sometimes just lead to more mental loops, more rumination.
The analysis offers a very specific, practical method for externalizing this process, which is journaling.
Journaling, really.
It sounds simple, but neurological research supports this. Writing physically moves the narrative out of the emotional center of your brain, the amygdala, and forces it through the logical language processing centers, the prefrontal cortex. The text suggests writing a letter directly to your past self.
A letter to the person who did the thing you regret.
Yes, a letter where you express understanding for their pain, where you acknowledge their anger without judging it, where you say, I see that you're trying to protect something you loved, and I see that you were terrified.
That sounds incredibly cathartic.
Doing this effectively quiets that inner courtroom. It gives the accused, your past self, a chance to finally be heard by the judge. And beyond journaling, stopping to share even a small part of your true feelings, your hidden regrets, with a trusted person in real life can begin to bridge that agonizing gap of loneliness we saw in the airport scene.
Because then you realize you aren't the only one carrying a shadow.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? When we pull all these threads together, from the bleeding dog to the explosive retaliation to the 20-year flight to the blinding flashlights, what is the ultimate takeaway?
What did you conclude?
I think it means that these terrifying, sweat-inducing dreams are not punishments. They're not indictments of our character. They are actually a roadmap.
A roadmap to what?
Our subconscious is mapping out the exact coordinates of our hidden pain, our suppressed anger, and our unhealed guilt. And it is begging us to go to those coordinates and address them with compassion instead of fear.
That is the perfect synthesis. The dream is a diagnostic tool handed to you by your own mind, wrapped in terrifying packaging.
It really has been quite a journey today. We started by unpacking how a horrific dream about a beloved dog having its life taken away isn't actually about the dog at all. It unravels into this profound exploration of our waking anxieties.
Right.
We looked at how our inability to act creates guilt, but how that very guilt is the undeniable mathematical proof of our own inherent empathy.
We examined the incredibly protective nature of anger and how bottling it up leads to explosive, uncontrollable retaliation in our subconscious. We normalize the primal human instinct to escape and run away when the data load of reality is too crushing for the brain to bear.
And we confronted the exhausting reality of being hunted for decades by our own inner judges,
Mm.
carrying secrets that isolate us from the rest of humanity, spotlighting our own flaws.
That's a lot to carry.
But most importantly, we found the off-ramp. We found the way out of the chase through emotional neutrality, understanding the pain behind our mistakes, and extending radical neurological forgiveness to our past selves.
And if you take one actionable thing away from this deep dive, let it be this. Think about the sheer amount of mental energy you spend aggressively policing yourself, hiding from your own perceived flaws, and running from your past.
Exhausting.
Now imagine what your life would look like if you took all of that massive energy and redirected it towards self-compassion, healing, and connection. The pursuit would end today.
It really would. We started this deep dive talking about that awful feeling of waking up at 3 in the morning, your chest pounding, staring at the dark ceiling, terrified of the monsters your own brain just created.
Yeah, that terrible lingering feeling.
But after unpacking all of this, I want to leave you with a slightly different way to look at that darkness.
Yeah.
What if the terrifying nightmares that haunt us the most aren't actually punishments at all? What if they're just our subconscious, sitting there in the dark with us, desperately trying to offer us the grace, the understanding, and the forgiveness that we so stubbornly refuse to give ourselves when we're awake?
That's a beautiful thought.
Think about that the next time you wake up with your heart racing. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Catch you next time.